He will read from his novel The Driftless Area, which has just come out in a German translation by Gerhard Falkner and Nora Matercha at Klett-Cotta Verlag. The title is Das Stille Land. Felicitas von Lovenberg from the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung will moderate the evening. I'm especially happy that we have two school groups tonight from the Claire Bloch Gymnasium and the Thomas Mann Gymnasium. Thank you for coming, guys. I would like to thank the Klett-Cotta Verlag to do this with us, of course the American Academy and the US Embassy.
Vielen Dank, ja auch willkommen von mir. Ich hoffe, man hört mich gut. Ich freue mich sehr, heute neben Tom Drury sitzen zu dürfen, denn das ist für mich ein ganz besonderer Autor und ich glaube, nicht nur für mich gewissermaßen bietet dieser Abend bei uns in Deutschland die Entdeckung eines der großen oder noch viel zu wenig bekannten Autoren der amerikanischen Literatur, denn Tom Drury ist einer der großen amerikanischen Autoren, das sage nicht nur ich, sondern das sagen alle, die seine Bücher lesen. 5 gibt es davon und bekannt geworden ist er zunächst einmal mit seiner Grouse County Trilogie und es gab mehrere Artikel jetzt zum Erscheinen, die gesagt haben, warum machen wir jetzt nach dem Ende des Vandalismus und Traumjäger, so heißen die beiden ersten Bände, nicht mit Pazifik gleich weiter. Das ist aber ganz richtig so, denn die Romane von Tom Drury spielen zu bestimmten Zeiten, aber sie spielen irgendwie auch außerhalb dieser Zeit. Das werden Sie gleich merken. Die Zeitrechnung ist eine ganz eigene, sie gehört vielleicht ein bisschen in eine andere Welt und der Roman, dessen Willen wir heute Abend hier sitzen, der eben gerade erschienen ist, stammt in Amerika schon aus dem Jahr 2006. Dass das alles nicht wichtig ist, merken Sie vielleicht daran, dass noch in diesem Jahr die ganzen 3 Romane der Grouse County Trilogie abermals in Großbritannien erscheinen. Das Stille Land ist gerade verfilmt worden, man darf darüber noch wenig sagen, aber Ende des Jahres kommt die Verfilmung in die Kinos. Es ist also alles richtig so, wie es ist. Tom Drury schreibt Romane, wie man immer sagt, aus dem amerikanischen Herzland. Seine Romane spielen in Iowa, aber sie spielen gar nicht nur in Iowa oder beziehungsweise ist das ein Iowa, das angereichert ist mit anderen Landschaften und anderen amerikanischen Atmosphären, kann man sagen. Für dieses Buch, um das es heute Abend geht, hat er sich eine reale Landschaft genommen, nämlich eine Art Gletschergebiet, Endmoränenlandschaft, das es in Iowa tatsächlich gibt. Das heißt nämlich The Driftless Area, wie der Roman im Original. Aber er hat dort eine kleine Stadt, Shale, dann wiederum erfunden. Und da spielt sich die Handlung, über die ich gleich noch was sagen werde, dann tatsächlich ab. Das amerikanische Herzland ist aber nicht nur Iowa, sondern als ich heute Abend hierher kam und mir irgendwie Kreuzberg anschaute, hatte ich irgendwie das Gefühl, das könnte auch alles aus einem Tom Drury-Roman entsprungen sein. Und ich glaube, Sie werden nachher merken, dass das Herzland von Tom Drury eines ist, das amerikanisch ist und trotzdem universal. Das hat alles was mit uns zu tun und vielleicht mehr als manchem lieb ist. Das sind entschleunigte Romane. Ich habe gerade schon gesagt, die Zeit ist eine ganz wichtige, hat eine eigene Zeitrechnung. Danach werde ich den Autor gleich befragen. Er hat debütiert, etwas zur Person, mit 38, das war eben im Jahr 1994. Da erschien das Ende des Vandalismus, The End of Vandalism. Und damit kam er gleich auf verschiedene Hitlisten. Der Roman galt als einer der besten 50 amerikanischen Romane. Er lässt sich viel Zeit zwischen seinen Büchern, weil er sie immer wieder überarbeitet und man spürt in diesen Büchern, dass jedes Wort an genau dem Platz ist, wo es hin will und wo es hingehört. Dieser Autor nimmt sich Zeit, aber er stiehlt dabei nicht unsere, sondern er baut wirklich Satz für Satz eine Art Vertrauen im Leser auf, das auch dann trägt, wenn das Buch Wendungen nimmt, die einen am Anfang überraschen. Gerade dieses Buch nimmt Wendungen manchmal ins Metaphysische, Sie werden es gleich hören, wo man denkt, welche Welt ist denn das jetzt? Aber glauben Sie mir, es traut sich, man muss sich trauen, dahin zu gehen, aber wenn man einmal da ist, fühlt es sich verdammt gut an. Er hat zwischen seinen Romanen als Journalist viel gearbeitet, er hat aber auch mal so Sachen gemacht wie die Website des County Museums of Art in Los Angeles betreut. Er hat viel geschrieben, er hat Schreiben unterrichtet an verschiedenen Universitäten. Und jetzt, glaube ich, sage ich noch ein paar Sätze zu diesem großartigen Buch. Das ist eine Art Mischung aus Thriller, Western, Gesellschaftsporträts, es ist eine Liebesgeschichte, es ist eine Geschichte unserer Gegenwart und es geht darin um Schicksal, Schuld und Sühne. Die Hauptfigur ist Pierre Hunter, so muss man erstmal heißen, wenn man aus Iowa kommt, Pierre Hunter. 24 Jahre ist er alt und erreicht damit wahrscheinlich ungefähr das Durchschnittsalter des heutigen Publikums, was ich sehr schön finde. Und er kommt aus diesem Städtchen Shale. Als wir ihn kennenlernen, auf den ersten Seiten des Romans, ist er noch 17, seine Freundin liegt gerade im Krankenhaus und stört sich an einer Laterne, die vor ihrem Fenster brennt und er schaltet dann irgendwie die Elektrizität aus und bekommt dann dafür Ärger und dass er Ärger bekommt, das ist so eine Art Leitmotiv in Pierres Leben. Dann springen wir etwas weiter, dann ist er 24 und ist nach dem Studium der Naturwissenschaften zurückgekehrt in die Provinz, die amerikanische Provinz, in seine Heimatstadt. Seine Eltern sind beide kurz vorher gestorben. Er ist also mit Anfang 20 gewissermaßen Waise und obwohl er studiert hat, ist er erstmal Barkeeper im Jack of Diamonds, der lokalen Bar, Restaurant, wo sozusagen die Leute des Ortes sich die Klinke in die Hand geben. Und vielleicht verrate ich jetzt nicht so viel mehr, außer dass Sie sich vielleicht einfach im Laufe des Abends fragen, manche Kritiker haben geschrieben, der Pierre sei eine Art Pechvogel. Der hätte immer Pech, denn gleich erlebt er etwas, wo er auch erstmal Pech hat. Aber nach Lektüre des ganzen Romans kann man sich fragen, ob Pierre nicht eigentlich irgendwie auch dabei sehr glücklich ist und was eigentlich unsere Vorstellung von Schicksal und Pech oder Glück ausmacht und ob die höhere Gewalt vielleicht dann doch dafür sorgt, dass man bis in alle Ewigkeit und über dieses Leben hinaus sehr, sehr glücklich ist. Coming back to this book, I mean, I suppose you have been coming back to it quite a lot as you have been involved with the filming of the Driftless Area. However, coming back to this book now, 9 years after its first publication, do you find that your relationship with your books changes over the years? How do you...
Well, I mean, it definitely changes between when you're writing it and after it's published. I don't feel my relationship to the book has changed greatly. Like you say, I've been working on the film adaptation, so the material is still much in my mind. But, you know, like, I read it recently, you know, to try to remember what's in it, and because it's also different from the film. So I wanted to know what was in the book, and so I read it. I find I can catch up to it that way.
Mm-hmm. Maybe a strange question. Do you play pool, billiard? Are you good at it?
Am I good?
Well, you must be good because when I read this book, I thought a lot about playing pool because somehow it's as though you hit one ball and it goes off into a different direction and then it hits the next one and this for me describes very much what's going on in this book, how something starts and then all of a sudden there's a chain of events that is completely makes sense, but you know, you have to have the cue in the right way. So that's just why I was wondering about.
I play pool. I wouldn't say I'm a really good pool player. But one of the concerns of this book was about circumstance, coincidence, how a chain of events, once it's in motion, can it be called back? Can it be stopped? And, you know, so that was something I was eager to explore, or I found out that I was exploring it as I was writing. So the pool metaphor is pretty good.
This book has at the center, it has, I was saying, Pierre Hunter, and he's 24 years old for most of the book. And in your Grouse County novels, I always had the sensation that children and animals are very, very important, or have a particular importance because sometimes they seem to know more than the adult world. And for me, Pierre is sort of at a stage in between. He's definitely no longer a child,
Right.
but maybe he's also not yet a fully grown adult. How important was it for you? How important for you was his age when you were writing it?
I think I wanted it to be a coming-of-age story, so I felt that he should be fairly young. And I wanted to get him through college and then bring him back to his hometown. So 24 was about the earliest I could do that. I think he is, as Shane points out, not very politely, he still has elements of a child in him. And I wanted him to be over the course of this, book, and I guess the year maybe that it covers. Mm-hmm. I wanted him to kind of grow up and learn some things. He doesn't have a lot of time, but I think that happens. So I wanted him to be somewhat naive. Mm-hmm. So I think the age was important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too, and I think he's also very trusting somehow in fate. He does not appear to be tremendously nervous or something about what's happening to him. He's
no. I mean, I think his fatal flaw, if he has one, and he does, would be the casual way that he treats himself mm-hmm. and the prospects for his survival. Mm-hmm. He really isn't terribly serious about anything except Stella. Mm-hmm. And that is like the first serious thing. I mean, early on, is a part set in high school, and Carrie says to him, like, do you ever say anything serious? And he said, well, I'm sure I do sometimes, mm-hmm. So he's not very serious about, he doesn't maybe place enough importance on taking care of himself. Mm-hmm. And he's looking for something else. He's looking for a larger mission than himself.
And he definitely finds one. Tom, I would love to talk about a few of the themes mm-hmm. of the book. In my brief introduction, I already said that all your work has a lot to do with time. At least for me it does. As a reader, I always think a lot about time when I read your books and how much they are very contemporary, and yet they, as I said, there's maybe this dreamlike quality that makes them appear as though they are contemporary but somehow not of our time. We have mobiles that turn up, and there are several signs that show us that this book is probably set near where it was published mm-hmm. in the early 2000s. How do you go about setting time, and how important is it for you as a writer for your novels, the sense of time, before we come to the sense of place?
Yeah. Basically, I like to work from deep memory. So I like to work from things that I've remembered for a long time. But I also like to write a contemporary story. So there is this kind of dislocation of time that goes on just in the way that I approach the writing, mm-hmm. in that it's contemporary, but it's really based on memories that may go back, 20, 30 years mm-hmm. or more. And I think that accounts for some of that kind of, that odd feeling, because there's a little bit of a mismatch, which mm-hmm. is interesting to me. And mostly I don't like, I don't like cell phones, and I don't like I don't like cell phones and computers as elements in a story. They're just too mechanistic to be mm-hmm. interesting to me. So I usually don't use them. And in fact, when a cell phone is used in this book,
he immediately forgets it.
Pierre says, how modern.
Mm-hmm. And he puts it down on the counter and walks away from it.
That's right, yeah. But it was necessary in that scene. But so I think that's what is, may account for some of what you're perceiving. Mm-hmm. But I think you're very much right that there is that kind of disparity mm-hmm. between the time that's set and the elements that you're seeing. They feel older mm-hmm. in the time.
Another, of course, and everybody who reads your books there's always a sense of, it's very much about a certain place, although Most of it is set in Iowa. Also, you know, your places are also fictional, and yet there is the driftless area, and I believe it's very important for the book, the landscape and the scenery. But at the same time, you know, every time your work is mentioned, everybody says, oh, it's the heartland, it's the homeland, it's Midwest, it's American, but yet it isn't, and to me it feels like really like a universal sort of place. But of course you were born in Iowa, you lived there, you went back there after stints
many
all
years,
over the US. So what does Iowa mean to you, and how does it refer really to the landscape of your books, especially this one?
It's Again, I like to work from deep memories, so what I remember best is the landscape in which I grew up, or I've remembered it longest, and so I like to use it, but I like to use it as a stage. I'm not trying to represent that place or the people who live there, and I feel free to draw in elements from anywhere. This book was written when I was living in Los Angeles. The Grouse County books were written when I was living either in New York or Connecticut. And so I'm not in that place, but I love the landscape. I love bridges and trees and gravel roads and, you know, dogs, and little towns, little houses, little lonely houses on a hill, you know, all things I remember very strongly. And it gives, I don't know, it's like, it seems to me like a good place it seems to me like a good setting for what I want to do. It's not too cluttered. Frequently you can have people know each other, you know, if they live in these towns, so you're not having a lot of, you know, obligatory introductions being made.
Well, they've at least heard of each other. Or somebody they know, somebody who knows somebody.
And they think that they either know everybody's stories or they think they do, and they're frequently wrong. But having them all feel that they know each other and can basically summon each other's stories at will gives you a kind of omniscience in the narration that is very natural, you know. So yeah, the place is important, but it's not limiting. And in fact, the orchard is actually an orchard that I encountered in Vermont, you know. So that's exactly what I mean. And also, Vermont is very much like the Driftless Area.
Oh, okay.
So my memories of Vermont, it's like big, you know, hills and views, and so my memories of Vermont fit very well into this book. So it's an amalgamation, I guess, of different things that I've seen. Well, I'm going to actually talk about I'm going to read chapter 5, and in this, so he'll go to California and come back. In this scene, Pierre is going on this kind of annual pilgrimage that he does, where he hitchhikes out to Northern California from the Midwest to visit his cousins and their kids. So he's hitchhiking. Pierre had never really got a bad ride. The worst that happened was that a driver would share an unexpectedly powerful strain of grass and play some song like Tecumseh Valley, and Pierre would become sort of comatose. Much of the music was old, as were most of the drivers, who remembered a time when the roads were jammed with people thumbing rides. He made fantastic time. The hitchhiker may appear carefree and open to experience, but in Pierre's case, this was deceptive. He got ruthless on the road, greedy for miles. He did not have to be anywhere in a hurry, but he hurried anyway. He remembered some of the people who had given him rides, a quiet, serious man who went from track to track, gambling on horses, another man with a rusted tub of crawdads in the back seat, a woman in a tan Carmen Ghia who laughed beautifully and lit up a metal hash pipe, winking like Santa's sexy niece as the white smoke curled around her face. But in each case, the ride had ended, and he had gone on. He did not attend the crawdad bake, or fry, or however the crawdads would be prepared, or learn to interpret a racing form, or spend the night with the hash smoker. Sometimes he thought it would be better if he had done these things. Not that he could have done them all, only the gambler had offered. But there may have been signals that Pierre and his transient nature had missed. To turn your life on a dime seemed to him the essence of American thought, but he'd never been able to do so until now. He made Utah in 2 nights, and there he met a tragic sort of woman in a mountain town. She was 30 years old or so, and drinking in the bar of the dark and worn-down hotel where he had checked in for the night. She'd had some hard times. Something begins to fade from the eyes after too much of anything. She had thick, dry, reddish hair and white scars on either side of her face, as if she had been attacked by a bear. In fact, she said, she'd done this with her own fingernails one time after going too many days on speed. Pierre did not know what to say to that, but she smiled and nodded, as if the pain had faded, leaving only a sort of impersonal amazement. They danced in the bar, and then, wanting to see the town, Pierre walked her home to the house where she said she lived with her grandmother. The house was close to the newly paved road that fell away from the town. The door was locked, and she knocked and called out, but nothing happened. "Yes, she does this if I come home late," she said. "But there's a ladder in the garage. Come on, you can help me carry it." So they went in the garage, and she turned on a light and looked around. There was a big yellow Cadillac, but no ladder that they could find. She stood with her hands in her back pockets. "Clever," she said. "She must have taken the ladder in the house. Good one, Grandma. That's thinking ahead for you. This is kind of a game we play." "Well, once you come back to the hotel," said Pierre, "you can sleep in my room." "Oh, no," she said. "I don't swing that way." "You don't have to swing anyway," said Pierre. "You can stay there, that's all." "Really? You would do that for me? You must be a religious kind of guy." "Because what I normally do if I can't get in is sleep in the Cadillac." "Well, you don't want to do that." "No, that's for sure." So they went back to the hotel and stayed the night, all on the straight and narrow, she in the bed and Pierre in a chair with a blanket. "And how are you doing over there?" she said. "Very well, thanks." "You might be interested to know I'm off the crank now." "That's good. And here's a promise I made to myself, that someday when I find a pile of cash, I'll take it to a plastic surgeon and I'll say, 'Make these scars go away.'" "They probably can." "Oh, these days?" She said, "It's a snap, I bet. They probably do it all the time." "The cash is the tricky part," said Pierre. "I think it'll happen, though. I can just see it." "If you can see it, you can be it," said Pierre. "Where'd you hear that?" "Beer school." "So you've abused substances too," she said. "Oh, many a time." "Do you think it's true?" "What? If you can see it, you can be it." "No." "What time is it?" 2:00. "For example," said Pierre, "you can see a llama, but you couldn't be one." "That's taking it pretty literal." "I'm going to sleep now." "You have passed your test," she said. "I didn't know I was taking one." "You didn't ask for anything or come jumping all over me. You were true to what you said. Now you're sleeping in some scuzzy chair. I admire that." "Well, you can't spend a night in your grandmother's car." "Hey, I got news for you. That wasn't even her house." "It wasn't." "Uh-uh." "Well, what if there had been a ladder?" "That would have been interesting, wouldn't it?" "What are you, crazy?" said Pierre. "Yeah, I guess. Probably pretty crazy." "Are you going to sleep now?" "Yeah. Good night." "No," she said. "You know what? I'm giving you something." She rummaged in her purse and then leaned way out from the bed with one hand on the floor and handed him a round yellow stone about the size of a tennis ball and covered with small depressions like the moon. "Thanks," he said. "It's my lucky rock," she said. "I found it in a quarry. I think it was made by heat or something." "You should keep it." No, it's too heavy. I've been looking for somebody to give it to. It has a good feel to it. You'll like it. Go ahead, throw it up and catch it. You'll see what I mean. Yeah, said Pierre. It's kind of sandy. Didn't I tell you? And for the rest of the trip, all the way to the coast and back, he carried the rock in the pocket of his safari coat, and he would throw it up and catch it while watching the road for rides. Pierre's cousin and her family lived in a small house in Northern California with peeling redwood trees growing in the back, and they would pitch a tent in the yard for Pierre to sleep in. His cousin owned a company that made custom skateboards endorsed by an apparently famous skateboarder that Pierre had not heard of, and her husband had a repair shop specializing in Saabs, and he drove old Saabs, and he thought that Saabs were just about the greatest thing. Their children were good souls and backgammon prodigies who would beat Pierre almost every time they played. He thought he was a fair backgammon player, but he was nothing compared to these children, who were 5, 7, and 9 years old. Even the youngest had a keen understanding of how to block and when to hit blots or leave them alone and when to double. It was extraordinary. Pierre stayed with them for 1 week, and it never got crowded or uncomfortable on account of the tent. They would chop wood for their winter supply and go to the ocean near Big Sur, where the children ran through the tidal pools. His cousin had an unorthodox style with an axe. She would not toss the blade to the side and swing as most do, but begin with the axe hanging motionless down her back and bring it up and over her head with gathering speed. And in this way, though slender and not very tall, she could split blocks that Pierre could barely dent. His cousins had the sanest family life that Pierre had ever known. The kids called him Uncle Pierre, and the day before he headed up the coast, they drew their faces on paper plates and gave them to him so he would remember what they looked like. So now he had the rock, and he had the paper plates, and everything was in place for what would happen next, although Pierre did not know what this would be, or even that it would be anything. It happened when he was nearly home. He got a little careless, as he often did at the end of the journey. At a truck stop in Minnesota, he took a ride from a man in a battered sky blue pickup who asked if he would split the gas money. Now, both the shape that the truck was in and the driver's request for money might normally have made Pierre wait for another ride. Sharing the cost was fair in theory, but from what he had seen, drivers who made a point of asking up front tended toward the mercenary. As for the truck, the panels were dented and scraped, the dashboard was delaminating, and there was no glass in the back window. But it was late afternoon, he had only 125 miles to go, so Pierre took the ride. The driver was a large man with long hair and a shade between yellow and white. Of Pierre's age, or maybe a few years older, he wore a green Boy Scout shirt with the arms sawed off at the shoulders and a royal blue insignia identifying him as a distinguished expert, though in what field it did not say, and probably the shirt had not belonged to the driver when the award was earned anyway. He had a round and sunburned face and jutting brow, and he would not look Pierre in the eyes, but he always seemed to be thinking of some other situation, and sometimes he appeared laid back, and at other times, for no reason, a look of alarm would flicker across his face. And as they went along, the driver said that he was going down to San Antonio to help his brother, who had found a lot of money in a car wash. Or rather than saying it, he yelled it, or nearly so, to be heard above the highway sound that rolled through the missing window. "How much is it?" said Pierre. "Thousands, tens of thousands anyway." "And somebody left it in a car wash?" So he tells me. "Well, what is it, drug money?" "Well, we don't know, but ill-gotten gains of some kind. It was in a paper sack from a grocery store. What if whoever left it wants it back?" And here Pierre was only making conversation. The story sounded made up, though it was not that unusual for something you would hear while hitchhiking. "Yeah, my brother's kind of worried about that aspect of it," said the driver with his hair dancing around in the backdraft of the missing window. "But once he gets it to San Antonio, those bastards can't touch him." "Well, I thought it was in San Antonio." "Yeah, that's what I mean." Pierre's backpack was then riding along in the bed of the pickup in violation of a fundamental rule of hitchhiking, which is don't get separated from anything you don't want to lose. The end of the ride showed the reason for the rule. when they came to the turnoff for the highway that Pierre would take the east the 70 miles to Shale, the driver went halfway up the exit ramp and stopped there on the shoulder. Why don't you just pull up to the stop sign? I'll get out there, said Pierre. No thanks, this is fine. Pierre looked across at the driver, thinking he had not understood. You've got to go there anyway. Yeah, I don't care. It's just right up here, said Pierre. The driver turned in his seat, set his back to the door, and kicked Pierre in the shoulder. Get the fuck out of my truck, he said. Well, okay, but it seems goddamn small after I gave you gas money. And don't forget your stuff. And once he said that, Pierre saw his mistake. Still, there was nothing to do but get out. He opened the door and began to step down, and the truck took off, throwing him on the pavement. But then the driver made a mistake of his own. Instead of leaving as fast as he could, he stopped a little ways off and looked back through the glassless window, and he yelled something. Pierre could not tell what, but it seemed to end with the word fool, which was hard to argue with under the circumstances. The backpack held nothing of value, but Pierre hated the thought of the thief getting the paper plates with the drawings. So he jumped to his feet, took the lucky rock from the pocket of his coat, wound up, and threw the rock at the truck. Sometimes things happen that seem to defy the second law of thermodynamics, which states that all systems move toward disorder. Once Pierre had dropped a lighter on the sidewalk, and it landed standing up. Another time, lying in bed with Stella, he asked what she would do if he could toss a quarter across the room and into a coffee cup sitting on the dresser. And she told him, and he threw the coin, and it went in the cup. And now the pickup began to move, tires spinning for a hold on the pavement, but it didn't matter, because the rock in its flight seemed to know what it was meant to do, and it followed a low arc and tailed off, going through the window frame and hitting the driver. The truck continued on up the ramp for a short while, losing speed, then veered west down a grassy embankment where it rolled for a while, missed some trees, hit another one, and stopped. Spellbound, Pierre walked down the bank and through the trees to the truck, where the driver lay partly on the seat and partly in the footwell under the dashboard. Pierre watched him a while to make sure he was breathing, though he had no idea what he would have done if he were not. Then he got his pack from the truck bed and went up and pulled the latch beneath the steering wheel and opened the hood. His thought was to tear out the ignition wires, but their location was not as obvious as he had hoped. But while surveying the various webs of wires, he saw a package that had been secured with duct tape behind the battery. He pulled off the tape and took the package from the engine well. It was a paper sack, folded over and bound with more tape. And when he got that off and opened the bag, he found that it was full of faded green bills, bundled by ink-stained rubber bands. Pierre thought for a short while and then opened the pack and pushed everything down and laid the sack of money in on top. Then he went back to the sleeping driver and pulled the keys out of the ignition and flung them into a bean field and walked away. He put the pack on his shoulders and went up the exit ramp. He walked for several miles under the light-banded sky, and eventually a man driving a Royal Crown truck stopped to give him a ride. And that's chapter 5.